One of the big reasons why the Orioles found success in 2022 and 23 is that despite a few injuries here and there, they stayed very healthy in those two seasons. Now, the O's have had a lot of success again this year, but the health has not been to the same level. The Orioles may have lost two more guys to injury in their loss to the Marlins on Tuesday night. And I'll break it all down coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Wednesday, July 24th, 2024, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on today's episode, we are going to recap the Orioles' 6-3 loss to the Miami Marlins on Tuesday night. Get you the 5 things you need to know from that one, including a tough day for Albert Suarez that left him heading to the bench after getting hit in the ankle by a line drive. We will talk about the Orioles offense looking good early, not so much late, the bullpen holding it together, but overall a loss to a bad team. And the loss of 2 players, not just Suarez, but Jorge Mateo left the game with an ugly looking arm injury. We'll chat through what those 2 injuries could mean for the Orioles roster going forward. And finally, the O's could be getting some reinforcements coming up here today. Maybe, just maybe, the Major League debut of Chayce McDermott comes tonight. We'll talk about that and everything going on with the O's on Tuesday coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by Booking.com. Booking.yeah. The right stay can make you a fan of any city, even your rivals. Check out Booking.com for your stay today. So the Orioles fall to the Marlins 6-3 in game 1 of a 3-game set on Tuesday night, and we will start there with the 5 things you need to know from that loss that, with the L, dropped the Orioles to 60-40 on the year. They have hit 100 games on the season, and hey, 60-40, not a bad pace for 100 games. Now, as I am recording, I've got kind of my side eye on Mets and Yankees. Mets leading the Yankees 3-2 in the Bronx in the bottom of the 7th, so that'll decide whether the O's are still up a game and a half or just a half game on the Yankees heading into play on Wednesday. But I'm going to get you the 5 things you need to know from the O's loss to the Marlins. And the first thing you need to know is Albert Suarez was pretty horrible, probably his worst start in an Oriole uniform, and he left the game early. Well, maybe by random high choice and maybe not, depending on how you look at it. But either way, it was not good from Suarez on Tuesday night. Just 2+ innings of work, allowing 6 earned runs on 8 hits, 3 Ks, a walk, a homer, and 6 hard hit balls allowed against a very much struggling Miami Marlins offense. And it was weird because Suarez went out there. The Orioles got him a run in the top of the first, so he takes the mound bottom half with the lead. And he immediately looked really good. He had a couple of strikeouts. It was a 10-pitch 0 in the bottom of the first. He was pounding the zone. The stuff looked nasty. We're like, all right, this is really good. He's facing a bad offense. It's go time. And then he comes back out there in the bottom of the second inning, and the Marlins just jump on him. A bunch of early super hard hit balls. He gives up an absolute missile leadoff homer to Jesus Sanchez in the second to tie the game at 1. And then it was just hard hit ball after hard hit ball after that. He just got into big trouble, gives up 4 runs in the second, finally gets out of it, comes back out for the third after the O's have cut it back to 4-3. Their offense is looking good. And he just kind of falls apart again, allows the first 3 batters of that third inning to reach. He was at 60 pitches, and Brandon Hyde was already trying to get him out of that game. After he had allowed a couple of runners in that third inning, Keegan Aiken was warming already in the Oriole bullpen. And then the final batter that Suarez faces hits a line drive at 102 miles per hour off the bat, off Suarez's ankle, caroms into foul territory, ends up being an infield single to load the bases with no outs. And Brandon Hyde and the training staff come out to check on Suarez. Hyde pretty quickly pulls him out of the game. And again, it's probably mostly about the fact that he was struggling and Aiken was ready, but it made it easier because he got hit by that liner. Now, as I am recording here, about 9:30 p.m. on Tuesday night, the game has just ended and still kind of waiting on the official word on Albert Suarez and Jorge Mateo as well, which we will get to that in just a moment. But it's concerning to lose Suarez like that. And again, he may have just been coming out of the game anyway. A switch hitter was coming up. The lefty Aiken was ready. He could have been coming out of the game no matter what. And we don't know the severity right now. Sometimes you just get a bruise. Maybe you get your next start pushed back. Sometimes you have something structurally wrong after that line drive and you got to go on the IL and miss some time. We just don't know. But either way, not a good sign because the Orioles already need starting pitching. We know that. And if it's anything serious, Suarez has to go back on the IL at all. You really got to add to this rotation. We know the Orioles need to add a starting pitcher at the deadline. Trade deadline just 6 days away. But if Suarez is missing any time, it becomes an even tougher situation. Now, they're already seemingly bringing up Chayce McDermott to start on Wednesday. We'll get to that later in the pod. But if you lose Suarez, you're going to have to bring Cade Povich back as well. It's nice at least that you have him as that option, but you're really not feeling great about the back end of your rotation at that point. So on pins and needles, I know he wasn't good, but you still kind of need Albert Suarez the way this Orioles roster is built. It would be not good if he had to miss any time. Second thing you need to know from this Orioles loss is that on the flip side, the starting pitcher for the Marlins, who apparently his name is Kyle Tyler, but could be Tyler Kyle or Tyle Kyler or, yeah, I don't know. It could be anything like that. But he had a little more luck on his side against the Orioles bats. Now, I would argue he looked almost as bad as Suarez did. And the Orioles hit him hard. They got 7 hard hit balls. They had 9 hits. They drew 2 walks. But they only ended up with 3 runs in 4 2/3 innings against Tyler. I mean, they hit into some bad luck. Jordan Westberg kind of killed a rally in the third. He hit a ball 102 off the bat. Jake Berger made a nice play, turned it into a big double play that kind of swung that inning. Cowser and Gunnar in back-to-back innings had huge groundouts where they smacked the ball to second, unfortunately, right at the second baseman that ended the frame. Like, the Orioles were seeing Kyle Tyler well. They squared him up, especially in those first 3 innings, and unfortunately just did not have anything to show for it. Now, they got him out of the game before the 5th, and they got into the Marlins bullpen, but just didn't have the same batted ball luck that the Marlins did in this game. But the third thing you need to know from the loss is the Orioles also brought some of it on themselves, specifically on the base pass. They did not run the bases well in this game. And that's surprising because this Orioles team is really known for how well they run the bases. Brandon Hyde talks about it a lot. It's one of the favorite parts for him about this team. And Baseball Savant has a team runner runs metric, basically showing, okay, how good is this team in total at running the bases? How many extra bases do they pick up? How many extra runs do they pick up because of how well they run the bases? The Orioles are 4th in Major League Baseball in that metric. They run well and run smartly. And yet the Orioles killed 2 rallies with base running mistakes on Tuesday night. The first one in the top of the second. The Orioles started that second inning with a couple of hits. They got a couple of guys on base. They had first and third with nobody out. Cedric Mullins was at first. And I didn't mind the decision for Mullins to try and steal second, but he got thrown out. And if you are going to steal second in that spot, you cannot get thrown out because it goes from, with 8 and 9 in the order up. You've got Mateo, or excuse me, you had really 9 himself in the order with Mateo up. You can't put yourself in a position where you just give away an out with Mateo already at the plate. And it went from first and third, no outs, to runner on third, 1 out. Then Mateo strikes out and Gunnar hits that hard ground ball that turns into an out, and you don't get any runs. But I don't mind the decision to steal. It's Cedric Mullins, it's your team's stolen base leader. And Ali Sanchez, the backup catcher for the Marlins who was starting, doesn't really throw super well, although he threw a pretty good dart. And it was a great tag by Otto Lopez at second base. The one that hurt even more was the one that happened in the third. Colton Cowser had just made a fantastic play, beating out with just pure hustle an infield single with 2 outs to bring in a run and make it a 4-3 game. That was just purely a hustle play by Cowser. And then on the very next pitch with 2 outs and a runner at first, O's down 1, Mountcastle hits a line drive into center for a base hit. Jazz Chisholm with a good arm in center field just comes up firing and guns down Cowser by like 10 feet at third base to end the inning. He tried to take the extra base running in front of him for no reason and got the Orioles thrown out of this inning. And, would the Orioles continue the rally? Who knows? 8 and 9 in the order. Mullins and Mateo were due up next, but you can't kill a rally like that. And that was a really big mistake in this game. And those 2 base running plays, I think, really turned this game early because the Orioles were really seeing Tyler well. They were swinging the bat super well those first 3 innings, and that Cowser mistake killed it. And they never really responded from there. That's the fourth thing you need to know from this Orioles loss to the Marlins, is that after those first 3 innings, the Orioles just didn't do anything on offense. They had just 2 base runners after the 3rd inning after getting unlucky, but looking pretty good against Kyle Tyler. Ryan O'Hearn got on base 3 times. They were seeing that breaking ball well. And then the Marlins turn it over to the bullpen, and give credit to the Marlins. They have a lot of good arms in that pen, and we saw a lot of them. And here's the thing for the Orioles. This is something I was going to talk about today had we not gotten other news. I will probably talk about it on tomorrow's episode. If the Orioles are looking for bullpen help, look no further than the team they are playing right now. The guys we saw in the 6th through 9th innings. Andrew Nardi, really tough lefty, 1-2-3 inning with 2 Ks. AJ Puck has been sensational over the past 2 months, basically unhittable over the past month. He goes 6 up, 6 down with 3 strikeouts. And then Tanner Scott, who still scares me because of his walk rate, did hit Austin Hayes with 2 outs in the 9th, but got 2 Ks in a scoreless 9th inning to pick up the save. It's a bad team with a really good bullpen and a lot of guys they could trade away, but the Orioles didn't have to help them out as much as they did, and they just did nothing offensively down the stretch in this game. And it was really a weird switch to flip because they looked so good early. You could maybe just say, hey, the Marlins had their number 5 starter out there, a guy that's not that good, and then they went to that good bullpen, and things just completely flipped for the Orioles. But the 5th and final thing you need to know from the Orioles' 6-3 loss to the Marlins on Tuesday to open up the series is that the Orioles bullpen did a heck of a job of keeping this game kind of where it was score-wise. Now, Keegan Aiken came into a really tough spot. He entered the game bases loaded, no outs in the 3rd, with the Orioles trailing 4-3 already. He gave up a sac fly. Then he threw a pitch to Nick Gordon that was basically in the dirt, and Gordon somehow swung at it and hit it weirdly enough to first base, where the Orioles could only get the out at first and allowed another run to score. So Aiken did allow 2 of the 3 inherited runners to score to make it a 6-3 game, but he did end up retiring all 4 batters he faced in his relief outing. And then the O's just went to some other guys who were nasty. Birch Smith, one of the newest Orioles, an inning and 2/3 scoreless with 3 strikeouts. He was running his fastball up there to 97. Smith has looked good already, but he looked ridiculously good in this outing. Then they turn it over to Vinny Natoli, who I am very in on right now. He has still not been scored on in an Orioles uniform. Natoli was just as good as Burch Smith. He gives the Orioles 2 scoreless innings, 1 hit, 1 strikeout, and no walks. That was the big thing from the O's pitching. They walked only 1 batter in this game, and it was Suarez. The entire bullpen had to cover 6 innings and didn't walk anybody. Then they go to Brian Baker. He goes 1-2-3 with a strikeout with a filthy changeup to get one of his strikeouts. Vinny Natoli's cutter, he threw 36 pitches in 2 innings, 23 cutters, 7 whiffs on 17 swings on that cutter. That thing is ridiculous. It has been great every time he's gone out there for the Orioles. And kudos to that part of the bullpen. Going that long and keeping it 6-3, the offense just did absolutely nothing as the bullpen was trying to say, we got you. Another zero. The Orioles bullpen has been better lately, and it's been these kind of lesser-known guys like Natoli and Smith coming up and getting key outs, but just wasn't in the cards for the O's, and they lose this game 6-3 on Tuesday. But the game was not the only thing they potentially lost in this one. I mentioned Albert Suarez. The hope is he wasn't really limping coming off the field. As I mentioned, he may have been coming out of the game anyway, so you really do hope that Suarez is okay. It was just a tough spot, and he pitched poorly. But Jorge Mateo also left this game with injury. And that play from Mateo in the 3rd when he left, that looked much more gruesome. And this could be, not a doctor, but could be some sort of extended injury if the Orioles don't get a little lucky here for Jorge Mateo. So we'll talk about that and what it would mean for the Orioles infield and the Orioles roster coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by Booking.com. Yeah. Listen, with summer travel heating up, especially travel for baseball games, it's time to explore those U.S. cities you secretly wanted to learn more about. Yeah, we're talking about your rival cities. With hotels, bed and breakfast, vacation rentals, resorts, and so much more at Booking.com, you might just find your perfect stay, even in your baseball rival city. Now, I wouldn't necessarily call the Orioles and the Marlins rivals, maybe more like the Ravens and Dolphins have a little bit of a rivalry going on. Either way, Miami's a fun city to visit, and you can see some baseball as well. And despite the loss, there were a lot of Orioles fans in Marlins Park on Tuesday night. They already maybe got their deals on Booking.com. On any of these hotels, they've got so many choices across the U.S. for your summer travel this MLB season, and you could join them by going to Booking.com. The right stay can make you a fan of any U.S. city, even your rivals. Book today on Booking.com, on the site, or in the Booking.com app. And today's episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by Prize Picks, America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active users. How do you play it? Well, after you download the Prize Picks app, all you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. And listen, as you're watching Team USA rack up the gold medals this summer, you can make a Prize Picks lineup of players across basketball, soccer, tennis, golf, and so much more. And it takes just 60 seconds. So download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. That's code LOCKEDONMLB on Prize Picks for a deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. So the Orioles lost the game 6-3 to the Marlins on Tuesday night, and they may have also lost Jorge Mateo. It was not a pretty sight what happened in between second and short in the bottom of the third inning on Tuesday. Kind of a weird ground ball up the middle where Suarez tried to go down and get it, couldn't quite get it. It was right in between Mateo and Henderson. Both were going for it. Both went into a slide trying to pick up the ground ball. I'm sure the video is on the internet. I'm certainly not playing it here. It is not looking good, but Mateo got rolled up on. He got rolled up on by Henderson. The Orioles also didn't record an out and kind of led to that 2-run rally for the Marlins in that inning. And they showed the replay and basically looked like Mateo's elbow had twisted. It was not good at all. He was down for a while, immediately came out of the game, was replaced by Ramon Arias. Now we do have word now that Jorge Mateo's x-rays did come back negative. So that is at least step one in good signs for Jorge Mateo, hearing from Brandon Hyde post-game here. And Hyde did say that Mateo is headed to get an MRI and at this point is considered day-to-day. After seeing that injury, I don't know if I would consider that day-to-day. That was gruesome. It was nasty. He looked to be in a lot of pain. I was in pain just watching it. Now, Hyde did also give, kind of getting live updates here on a pod that's not live, but did give an update on Albert Suarez, said he exited with a left shin contusion and that he should be okay. So that was best case scenario, gets hit by a liner, but should be fine for the next start because the Orioles are certainly going to need him in this rotation despite a rough start on Tuesday. But Hyde said that the MRI is going to determine the severity of his injury, and it could be something where he has to go on the IL. Now, this is where the Orioles are in an odd spot right here because you're going to want to know sooner rather than later what is going on with Jorge Mateo. Now, we know, first of all, he has not been good, especially since coming back from that freak concussion that he suffered in early June. He returned from the concussion IL on June 11th, and since then, hitting just .208 with a .228 on base, just a 28% hard hit rate, and a 58 WRC plus. Been 42% worse than league average at the plate, and he was above league average with the stick before that concussion, and he's been much, much worse since then. Now, whether it's the IL or he really is just day-to-day and he gets super lucky, the Orioles are going to need to make a roster move because remember, this happened with Ramon Arias about a month ago or so when he got, or excuse me, with Jordan Westburg, I should say, about a month ago when he got run into at Yankee Stadium, that weird play by Juan Soto. Westburg ended up not needing to go on the IL, but he was unavailable for a couple of days. And with the way the Orioles roster is put together, they only have one infielder on their bench at any given time. So as soon as an infielder gets injured, you end up with 0 infielders on the bench. And that is not good because if anyone else gets hurt in game, or you just want to pinch hit for one of your infielders, because generally it's either Arias or Mateo playing, and you sometimes want to pinch hit for them at a big spot late in the game, you can't do it if you don't have another infielder on the bench. So for example, if Mateo is going to be out for like 3 days, but there's no use putting him on the IL because that puts him out for 10 days, well, then you have no infielders on the bench. You're starting Gunnar and Westburg and Arias in every game. And if you want to take one of them out or one of them gets injured again, you can't do anything about it. So you need to get an infielder here. Now, if Mateo doesn't have to go on the IL, they would have to do what they did last time. Remember, Kyle Stowers was just in an unfortunate spot. He had options. He wasn't playing every day. The Orioles had to get Nick Maton here to be an emergency infielder. So they did that and they optioned Stowers. Now, Westberg ended up being okay, but he had to miss a few games. If the same thing happens here, unfortunately, Heston Kjerstad is probably going to end up being that kind of sacrificial lamb that through nothing he did wrong would have to go down to AAA and probably stay there for 10 days potentially until the Orioles could make another roster move later, because they would need to get another infielder here. Now, the easier move would be if Mateo gets more tests tomorrow and they realize, okay, he does need to go on the injured list, then you don't have to sacrifice Kjerstad. And I would think the Orioles will get those tests done on Mateo tonight, and if not, early in the morning, and they will have plenty of time before having to make a roster move before Wednesday's game, before they actually make that decision. So hopefully they get that done quicker and they get an answer on what's going on with Mateo's arm. But if it is that situation where you just need an infielder, you would probably see Connor Norby, because he's already on the 40-man roster, and then Kjerstad go down, and then you go from there. But if Mateo does go on the IL, you basically have three options. Now, you could argue, well, kind of there's a couple more. I mean, Nick Maton and Taron Bava are down there, and yeah, they are. But the three options you would want to see: Connor Norby, Coby Mayo, Jackson Holliday. Those are your three options who you would legitimately like to see, any of them, in the big leagues. Now, you would definitely want someone you are confident in playing the infield regularly, because even though Ramon Urias is swinging the bat a little bit better lately, I don't think you want Urias in there every single day, especially if Mateo goes on the IL for at least 10 days or more. I would say at this point, if Mateo's injury is injured list, but not necessarily like super serious where he's missing a long stretch of time, I would think Connor Norby is the most likely option, because he's on the 40-man roster and Holliday and Mayo are not. It's much easier to just call him up here. He is a right-handed hitting second baseman, which makes him a more seamless replacement for the role that Jorge Mateo plays on this team. And although he's not a great defensive second baseman, he can hold his own there enough to play the infield, and then you can at least put Urias in defensively late in games to make that spot a little bit better. And this is the role that Connor Norby played before. He played this role when Mateo went on the concussion IL the last time, hit a home run, looked pretty solid in some of his ABs. He could help the Orioles because they need a little bit more right-handed hitting right now. Norby could be that answer. I would say number two most likely would actually be Jackson Holliday. The Orioles do have a lot of right-handed pitchers coming up. They're going to see two more in this Marlins series, and there's a good chance they see three righties in the Padres series back at home this weekend. And maybe you want another left-handed bat in there if you're seeing all the righties, and that would allow Holliday to play every day against those right-handed pitchers. Now, Holliday was on the IL with an elbow injury for a bit. He returned a couple of weeks ago. He's been great offensively since returning. And the even better news, he finally started playing the field again in AAA on Friday night. They had DH'd him for a while because of the elbow, but he's been back in the field at second base since then. And I think this might be a great time to get him back onto this roster and give him a second chance and get him some playing time. The reason I would put Coby Mayo third right now is, listen, his bat of the three has been the best in AAA. He just continues to rake down there. It is amazing to watch Coby Mayo hit. But this is how I feel about Coby Mayo right now. I've said it before, I'll say it again. His defense in terms of his footwork, in terms of his hands, fielding the baseball at third base, it looks good. It looks much improved. I worry about the throwing arm. He makes a lot of egregious throwing errors kind of game after game. Like, it's not every single night, but the ones he makes are really bad, and that concerns me. And this is how I feel about Coby Mayo. If the Orioles were not at least worried about his defense at third base, he would already be in the big leagues playing fairly regularly for the Orioles. That is currently how I feel. I think the Orioles are worried enough about that throwing arm accuracy that they don't want to call him up. They are waiting for a spot where they can more play him a little bit at third, but mostly first base and DH when they do call him up here. And if Mayo is the move, that would be great for the offense. But whenever he's in there, he would have to be playing third base because that's where the opening is. It would be in the infield with Mateo out, and I don't know if the O's are ready to do it. Any of them would be options. We'll obviously see how this all plays out. If it ends up being a long-term injury for Mateo, then I think it's more likely it's Holliday or Mayo instead of Norby to really have them try and solidify that spot. But either way, going to be very interesting how this all plays out. And of course, we'll get you even further updated on tomorrow's episode. But the other thing I'm going to be talking about on tomorrow's episode, I mean, we could be talking about the Major League debut of Coby Mayo, But I'll definitely be talking about the MLB debut of another Orioles prospect because Chayce McDermott, just confirmed by Brandon Hyde after the game on Tuesday night, will be activated, starting and making his major league debut on the mound for the Orioles on Wednesday in Miami. I'll let you know what to expect from McDermott's debut. That is coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app, they actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time, well, they take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. Now, I've talked about it on here before, but I have literally bought tickets on the Game Time app with their last minute deals where you can save up to 60% on Orioles tickets. They've got flash deals as well, which are great deals right before an event. I've bought them on Utah Street. They get sent right to the Game Time app on my phone. I scan them and go into the ball game. So take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account. Redeem code LOCKEDONMLB, that is LOCKEDONMLB, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. So we finish up today's episode with an impending MLB debut for the Orioles on Wednesday. Chayce McDermott, in my opinion, the number one pitching prospect in the Orioles system, joined the Orioles in Miami on Tuesday and was added to the taxi squad. Now, the Orioles then named Corbin Burnes their starter for Thursday's day game and left the Wednesday start as TBD. So if you could do any kind of connecting the dots at all at like a second grade level, even though the Orioles weren't saying it, you could pretty much see that, okay, Chayce McDermott is going to be activated on Wednesday to make his major league debut. Brandon Hyde didn't want to say anything until after Tuesday's game, but then after the game, he did confirm it to the media. Chayce McDermott is going to start on Wednesday night. And this, very exciting for the Orioles, who get to make another major league debut for a pitcher. We saw it from Cade Povich a few weeks back. Now we get to see it with Chayce McDermott. So first of all, who is Chayce McDermott? Well, he is a 25-year-old right-handed pitcher who the Orioles acquired in the Trey Mancini trade from the Houston Astros back at the 2022 trade deadline. He is about to be 26, actually, in August, and he's been a top 10 prospect in the O's system for a while. I see him as the number one pitching prospect. Some people see him as number two behind Cade Povich in this system. At the moment, Eric Longenhagen at Fangraphs has him as the eighth best prospect in the O's system, number two pitching prospect with a 45 plus future value. Now for Chayce McDermott, it has been, I would say, a pretty good year at AAA for him. He made it up to AAA in the second part of last season, 51 innings there for the Orioles, and then started this year in AAA and has been really good in 20 starts, 91 innings for him on the mound, a 3.96 ERA with a 3.96 FIP. He's basically pitched to what he should be doing. 32% strikeout rate. That is elite for a starting pitcher. We've seen it the whole way through the minors. And then a 13.5% walk rate is a very concerning number. Now, opponents hitting only 222 against the right-hander. And the reason is his stuff is absolutely fantastic. It is a 5-pitch mix from Chayce McDermott. It's heavy on the four-seam fastball. And I'm going to show you here if you are watching on the Locked On Orioles YouTube page. If you're not, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. But if you are watching right here, I'm going to put up a graph of the pitch mix for Chayce McDermott in AAA Norfolk this season. As you can see, 49% of his pitches are the four-seam fastball, and it is a really good one. Averages at 94, can run it up to 96, 97 at times. It's got a good swing and miss rate. Opponents hit just 236 against it, but with an expected batting average of 169, gets hit a little harder than some of his other pitches, but it is a go-to fastball that plays really well up in the zone as well. Now, the number two pitch he throws about 19% of the time is a cutter. It sometimes looks more like a hard slider. That's probably what you would think of it when you see it. Opponents hit just 206 against it, got a 43% whiff rate, pretty low hard hit rates. That is a really good pitch that he throws to righties and lefties. Then he's got his changeup, throws it 13% of the time. Orioles have really worked with him on that pitch. That's more of his left weapon against left-handed hitters. And it's got a good whiff rate, 40%. opponents not hitting that well against it, and only a 20% hard hit rate against that changeup. So even if they get the bat on it, guys do not hit that pitch hard. Then he has two other pitches. He has more of a normal looking slider. This one's at 81 miles an hour, while his cutter is at 85. More of a loopy slider, but hey, it does get some swing and miss when he throws it, mostly to right-handers. And then he also has a curveball, throws each of those pitches about 9% of the time. But also with the curveball, hey, guys don't really square it up too often. It is a really good mix. When McDermott is in or around the strike zone, he has some absolutely incredible stuff. And at least for AAA hitters, it has been impossible for them to hit him. The issue is he can spray the ball. He can get into deep counts. He can walk guys a lot. He can struggle to get deep into ball games. He's been ousted in the first and second inning in multiple starts because he just can't find the rhythm. And it can be ugly when he's struggling with the command. But when he is on, his stuff plays so well that if he is just in the strike zone, that's the only thing. It's so good, guys can't square him up, and he will dominate hitters. Now, his last start in AAA was kind of a planned short one. The Orioles had him go just one inning on Friday night in AAA. That was a planned one inning outing. The Orioles generally do this with some of their top pitching prospects coming out of the All-Star break just to keep them more rested. They put them on like a one inning start just to give them some more rest and just get him a little bit of work. Now, he did allow 4 runs in that one inning on Friday, so that's not exactly what you wanted, but he's had some amazing starts this year. He's had some struggles. What should you expect? 5 innings, some strikeouts, some walks, some first start shakiness. It won't be perfect, but you'll see flashes of some incredible stuff. Now, the Orioles are going to have to make a roster move as of recording here about 10 p.m. Tuesday night. We don't know what it will be. Most likely, unless a pitcher is going on the IL for some reason, the Orioles have 3 options because they have 3 relievers who could be sent down and do have options. That is Birch Smith, Keegan Aiken, and Brian Baker. Now, all 3 of them did pitch in the game on Tuesday, so all 3 could go down. My guess would be that the guy is Birch Smith because he threw the most out of those 3 on Tuesday. He threw 27 pitches. He's also the newest to the team, so maybe the O's could go without him for 15 days and then try and bring him back at some point because he's been so good. But if you're going off just of performance, there's certainly a possibility of it being either Aiken or Baker being sent down because, again, they all did pitch on Tuesday, and McDermott can be your fresh arm. And you would still have Cole Irvin as a rested long reliever behind McDermott on Wednesday if it does get out of hand. But hopefully this is kind of a soft landing spot against a Marlins lineup that did look good against Suarez Tuesday, but generally has not been good this year. The Orioles needed a 5th starter after optioning Cade Povich to AAA before the All-Star break. They only had 4 starters. It was going to be as late as this Saturday. They would have needed a 5th starter by. So it was most likely going to be McDermott or Cole Irvin. So you either would choose Saturday against the Padres or Wednesday against the Marlins. Probably much better for McDermott to just have him go up against Miami instead of San Diego and choose him to pitch on Wednesday. And the other good thing it does is it lines him up to then be ready for Monday when the Orioles have a doubleheader against the Blue Jays, and they're going to need 2 starters. That allows McDermott to be on regular rest for that one. They could also recall Cade Povich for that game, and wouldn't that be something to see? A doubleheader where Povich and McDermott pitch. That would kind of be fun to watch on Monday. But first up is that first start here on Wednesday night, and when I return on the podcast tomorrow, I'll have everything you need to know from Chayce McDermott's Major League debut, and of course, recapping the entire Game 2 between the Orioles and the Marlins. Edward Cabrera, the flame-throwing righty who's had a lot of struggles with injuries and performance so far this year, gets the ball for the Marlins. And then I'll also get you any updates we have on Jorge Mateo, Albert Suarez, and any roster moves that the Orioles make. But that's coming up on tomorrow's episode. Until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.